Have you ever experienced a haunting? I don't mean tagging along on a ghost hunt or watching them portrayed on a paranormal TV series. I'm talking about very real occurrences that happen right before your unbelieving eyes. They can be frightening and life-altering experiences, especially when you're convinced your family is being threatened. Such a thing happened to a young mother in San Pedro, California in the late 1980s. And it's become the subject of many documentaries and paranormal reality series since then. But what really happened in that house in San Pedro? Let's dig into it because this is extremely strange. It's the winter of 1988, and 23-year-old Jackie Hernandez is pregnant with her second child. She is also in the midst of a very turbulent and unhappy marriage to her husband Al. Removing herself from the relationship, she moved out with her 2-year-old son Jamie into a bungalow-style home in San Pedro, California. From that point on, her and her children's lives would be affected by supernatural events that would defy the imagination and eventually force them from their new home. But that would hardly be the end of her living nightmare. Jackie had taken on 2 jobs to support her son and her soon-to-be-born daughter, Samantha. She was also attending school at the time to build a better life for them all. Though very stressed out with taking on these responsibilities, she maintained a positive frame of mind, looking forward to better days ahead. But throughout their first year in the home, there was something about the house that just wasn't right. Jackie always had the feeling there was someone observing her. Then came the unexplained bangs, footsteps from the attic, and objects that appeared to move by themselves. It was 1989 when she went into Jamie's room and recoiled in horror as she saw the apparition of an old haggard-looking man standing over him as he slept. The spirit turned to stare menacingly at her before dissipating completely before her eyes. She described him as wearing a red flannel shirt that was tucked into his pants, which she said were, in her words, high waters. Then there were instances of her cat chasing odd shadows, voices now emanating from the attic, and one experience of watching pencils fly out of a pencil holder. Jackie at first entertained the idea she might be hallucinating some of this, perhaps as a result of her pregnancy. As the strange events continued in the home, she eventually unburdened herself to a neighbor, Susan Castaneda, who often stayed with the kids while Jackie was at work. While sitting in the living room one day, they both heard a loud crash from the kitchen. When they went in to investigate, they found a painting and the nails securing it had been ripped off the wall, with the painting leaning up against the sink. Oddly, the nails were on the floor and all pointed tips up, as if to create a dangerous hazard for anyone walking through. With this, she began to fear for herself and her children. Proving Jackie was not imagining any of this, one babysitter claimed she witnessed what resembled a distorted heat signature in the hallway leading to the kids' room. Another, Tina Lawler, saw a door to Jamie's room open itself every time she went in to check on him, as well as strange lights that seemed to appear on the kitchen ceiling. Jackie decided to document the happenings, which included more weird orbs of light that would often behave and travel in erratic ways. Most disturbingly, a very acrid liquid materialized from the walls and corners of the kitchen one night, while she and another babysitter, Christina Zivkovic, did the dishes. When she attempted to determine the source of the fluid, she traced it to the attic, and when she opened the hatch that led to it, was greeted by the gruesome sight of the detached head of the same entity she had encountered in Jamie's room. This caused Jackie to scramble down the stairs, falling and hurting herself in the process. She confided in her estranged husband Al, who may have felt perhaps Jackie was making it all up for attention. Her landlord was also told of the happenings, and taking her a bit more seriously, arranged for two priests to come in and bless the house, but their presence unnerved Jackie as they placed blame on her for the situation, at one point focusing their attention on a decorative skull she had placed inside her aquarium. They claimed she had brought death into her house. Despite that, they blessed the house and left, and Jackie was stunned to see a social worker appear at her door the following day, responding to a complaint filed by the priest, who claimed, among other things, their suspicion she was on hallucinogenic drugs. Now experiencing difficulty sleeping, Jackie became plagued by nightmares, once dreaming of a young man being clubbed over the head with a lead pipe and drowned in San Pedro Harbor sometime in the 1930s. In this dream, she became somewhat empathic, literally experiencing the terror of being held underwater and losing consciousness as her life ended. Now quite concerned for her friend and her children, Susan contacted Dr. Barry Taff, a well-known investigator of paranormal phenomena, who is the Associate Director of the Parapsychology Department at UCLA. Susan had previously seen him on TV and was aware of his investigation into the case that would spawn the 1982 film, The Entity. Dr. Taff agreed to visit the home on August 8th and brought along a camera crew as well as a slew of recording equipment to document any activity there. Among those accompanying him was a young photographer named Jeff Wheatcraft, who was something of a skeptic at that point in time. They began by interviewing Jackie and Susan and were somewhat unconvinced of the story at first, but at some point they heard what Taft described as a 200-pound rat scurrying around in the attic. Volunteering to access the attic through a hatch in the ceiling, Jeff climbed up and began taking a few random photos. At this point, he had the inescapable feeling he was not alone, but nonetheless carried on. To his surprise, some pictures revealed the lights Jackie had previously reported, but the session took a terrifying turn when he felt the camera he was using suddenly and violently pulled from his hands by an invisible force, causing the cameraman to exit the attic in panic. After a few minutes of explaining what had occurred and taking some time to gather himself, Jeff agreed to go back into the attic to retrieve his gear, this time armed with a flashlight and accompanied by another photographer, Barry Conrad. Searching for the camera, he found the lens and housing of it separated and placed in two different areas of the attic, with the housing lying inside of a box. Jeff took one final glance inside the attic as he closed the hatch behind them and reported seeing 3 bright flashes, followed by a black mass forming that resembled, in his words, 3 guys standing there. Samples of the oozing liquid were taken and sent out to be analyzed. The results were troubling, as it was confirmed to be human blood plasma containing heavy traces of copper and iodine. After this initial visit, Dr. Taft remained in contact with Jackie through the weeks and months leading up to September of 1989, when Jackie reported the spirit of the old man becoming even more prevalent and aggressive in the home. Moans were heard coming from the attic, and objects were being thrown across rooms with impunity. So, in the middle of the night, Taft, Wheatcraft, and others headed back to San Pedro. Now by this time, Jackie was less than happy with the investigators, who she claimed were more invested in documenting the activity than they were in actually helping her and her kids. She felt they had done nothing more than stir things up, and then left her to her own devices. Nonetheless, at that point, who are you going to call? Once there, Jeff again ventured into the attic, this time accompanied by a different photographer named Gary Bohm. While they were up there, the occupants of the first floor heard the bizarre sound of what sounded like a loud snap, and, a bit concerned about it, called the men back down. They had just about finished their time there and began to head back down when everyone on the first floor heard Jeff scream and saw him being pulled back into the attic. Gary quickly went back up to check on his colleague, taking continuous flash photos in the absence of a flashlight, and found Jeff hanging by the neck on a clothesline rope that was tied into a sailor's knot and wrapped around a nail protruding from an exposed beam. Jeff was released from this horrifying position by Bohm and Conrad, who bent the nail down to free him, after which they made their way down to the first floor, where the shaken and disoriented Wheatcraft was attended to by Taff and Company. Ultimately, he regained his senses and composure, and was certain without the help of his colleagues, he would have surely died from the hanging. This event proved to be the breaking point for Jackie, and her growing concern for her children's welfare forced a move to a mobile trailer in another city. There she reconciled with her husband, but their relationship again failed, leaving her on her own once again. But this move would not bring an end to Jackie Hernandez's torment or her unwelcome contact with the spirit world, as her frightening encounters would continue as if the vengeful spirit at the bungalow had somehow attached to her in her new location. One day, while moving a TV set into a shed with two of her friends, she claimed all three saw the face of the man who had terrorized her appear on the screen, and then later was kept awake by pounding coming from the shed. At one point, she claimed to see a black mass form just before Samantha's bedspread burst into flames. So at this point, it could be theorized that the entity was not simply attached to the property, but to Jackie herself, and that perhaps the stress and turmoil she had to endure made her a target for a tortured malevolent spirit that was seeking a host or some form of a kindred spirit. Taff and his crew were once again called in, and taking a more spiritual approach as he continued to investigate the house, he employed a Ouija board in an attempt to contact the spirit residing there. The reportedly successful session revealed it was a man who claimed to have been murdered at the docks nearby, and research suggested it may have been a 28-year-old man named Herman Hendrickson who lived in the early 1900s. He confessed to harboring anger toward Jackie and her family, but especially toward Jeff Wheatcraft, whom he claimed resembles the man who killed him and was never brought to justice. Over the next 3 years, Jackie would claim that ghosts would still visit her, with one being benevolent and relatively harmless, and another who was more aggressive and resentful. It seemed that her very presence would attract both and tap into her sensibilities, with one, the more gentle of the two, leading her to where he was buried, just a few blocks from the bungalow she and he once called home before his passing in 1913. It's been surmised his name is John Damon, who originally built the bungalow, and he appeared as a ball of light to Jackie that eventually dissipated, perhaps saying his final goodbyes. Jackie lived in the trailer until 1990, when she returned to live in Los Angeles. She claimed at that time the ghostly visits became more infrequent, and said beyond a few episodes with her oldest, Jamie, who was old enough to remember what went on in that bungalow, that they have since moved on. Now, it is extremely rare when this much photographic evidence accompanies claims of a haunting, and Jackie Hernandez deserves most of the credit for getting that ball rolling. Skeptics have done their best to pick this story apart, but I think more out of a concern that this particular case can't be so easily dismissed. And if you can't pick apart a story, you assault the character of the subject. This way you're always right. Skeptics love to paint Jackie as a single mom with little money who is seeking a big payday, which is incredibly myopic and speaks to the disdain for the class of person that they perceived her as being. As we've seen in prior episodes, and is still the case today, Jackie had some concerns as to the ulterior motives of the investigators. So, a note to paranormal investigators: even with the best of intentions, once you make it more about you than about them, it's probably going to go sideways at some point, and it's going to happen in a hurry. To this day, Jackie's relationship with Barry Taff remains strained at best. But nonetheless, everybody's story has remained remarkably consistent through the years, and that includes friends, babysitters, and even unwitting photographers like Jeff Wheatcraft, who have little motive to lie about anything that happened there. So whether it was the property or Jackie Hernandez herself that was haunted is a fair question. But to me, this case seems legitimate.